接下来，让我们掌声有请畅销书《创业的国度》作者 Saul Singer 先生带来他的主题演讲，探索未来教育的原动力。有请。Our next speaker is Mr. Saul Singer. He's a co-author of Startup Nation: The Story of Israel's Economic Miracle. Welcome.
Thank you. We are in the middle now of a global education crisis. This is true in China, it's true in Israel, it's true everywhere. And I think to understand the problem we're facing, it's best to focus on two parts of the system, the beginning and the end. So I think about my own daughter. We took her to first grade, the first day of first grade, about 16 years ago. And she, of course, was wearing a big backpack, like we saw previously in the pictures, with a picture of Snow White on it. She was so proud. Her younger sisters were so jealous. And she came to that school with maximum motivation, maximum curiosity, maximum lack of fear, maximum confidence that she could do anything. No one had told her that she was bad at math or bad at art. She had never received a piece of paper like this with lots of red marks on it, you know, that tells her what's wrong, not what she's good at. So we have actually a tragic aspect of our education system, which is, if you look at motivation, starting in elementary school and going through high school, we see that it drops precipitously. And this is a violation of what should be the first rule of education, which is the first rule of medicine: do no harm. That should be our rule in education. And right now, we are racking our brains. We are trying to figure out, how can we motivate kids? How can we get them more excited? How can we make them more curious? How can we make them more innovative? Well, that's how they start. So our question should be, how can we stop taking that out of them? How can we start from what now is the top and bring kids up, not down? So that's our first major challenge in thinking about the problem with education today. And I would say that the other way of understanding our problem is through the end of the process. The point in time where a young person comes out of university, comes out of the system. And I think when we think about our own young people, we may recognize this. They come out and they're lost. They really have no idea how to deal with uncertainty, how to deal with the lack of a framework. They've been in a framework their whole lives with everything tightly defined. And no one has given them the tools to deal with a fast-changing environment, to deal with uncertainty, and to deal with basically almost anything they have to deal with in real life. So the other part of our crisis is, through all that education we're giving, we're not only bringing kids down, we're also not preparing them for life. So how did we get here? What's been this progression we've gone through with education? Well, for centuries, we basically didn't have or didn't need any education. Everyone was a farmer. Even the kings and queens of Europe were illiterate. So you could be a good farmer and not have any education. But then the world got more complicated. We're in the industrial age, we're working in factories, and suddenly we need more education. And in the United States, they did something called the high school revolution in the 1930s and 40s, where they just decided everybody has to go to high school. But if you did, then you would be able to provide for your family. You would be able to get a good job just with that high school degree. And in fact, a lot of the reason, if you think about why the United States United States became the superpower, the economic superpower that it is, as opposed to Europe, I think it's because the United States universalized education before Europe did. So that was the high school revolution, but then the world got more complicated again. We're working in offices, we're in the knowledge age, the information age, and suddenly we need to go to university. And it was true for a while that if you went to university, you graduated, your future was assured. You would get a good job. You were prepared for life. But we all know that's not true anymore. I just heard yesterday that there are 37 million university students in China. We're producing millions and millions of university graduates, and here and in the US and all over the world, they are having trouble finding the jobs that they should be finding right now. And how could that be when employers are looking for people? The jobs are there, and employers are having trouble filling them. And the university graduates are there, and they're having trouble finding jobs. How could this be? There's a huge gap. And I think that what we're seeing is the education system essentially hitting a wall. Because until now, we didn't change education. We just got more of it as the world got more complicated. But now we can't all get PhDs. Getting more education is not going to be the solution for the crisis of university students not matching the world. And if you think about it, the kids entering first grade now, they might graduate university in the year 2034. I mean, our education system is not designed at all for that future. We have no idea what the future will be like at that time. So how do we think about school in this era when it actually has to change and not just get more of it? So let's look at this gap, this mismatch between education and life. School is basically very structured. It doesn't change very much. Now we're talking about incredible innovations, we're talking about change, we're talking about AI, but fundamentally, school is not changing nearly as fast as the world around it. And most of all, it's characterized by spoon feeding. Now spoon feeding, we know, is when the teacher just transmits information to the student sits there passively. We call that spoon feeding. But it's not just on the level of the classroom. It's on the level of the whole school, because the school is also completely defined. The classes that you take, exactly when you're taking them, the teachers, the subjects, exactly what you're supposed to learn. It is all very tightly defined. Effectively, the whole system is a form of spoon feeding. But life is not like that. Life is completely unpredictable. It's accelerating. It's changing faster and faster. I mean, we think things have moved fast over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, we didn't have a smartphone. Our lives were completely unrecognizable today to ourselves 10 years ago. But 10 years from now, there's going to be much more change. So life is accelerating, school is not, and life is challenging. Life is about overcoming all kinds of challenges, solving problems, figuring things out, and that's not what school is today. So we need to change, we need to be adaptable, we need to be able to learn and unlearn. We talked about here about continuous learning, but it's not just going back to school all the time or taking another course. It's actually, a lot of it is unlearning. It's being able to kind of throw away what we think we know and start over again. And lastly, we need to be entrepreneurial. And this is the hardest part, but maybe the most important part. And I don't mean entrepreneurial in the sense that we all need to start, we all need to found startups, or we all need to work in startups. What I mean is a way of thinking. An entrepreneur looks at the world and sees problems that most people don't see, because most people just take for granted there's nothing that can be done. They see a problem that can be solved. They see a problem that is an opportunity. Now, we can all be entrepreneurs in that sense. Whether you work in a big company or wherever we are, there are always problems that are opportunities if we put those entrepreneurial glasses on and if we develop the entrepreneurial skills to deal with them. So we've talked a bit about the future of work and about how AI and robots are going to take away more and more jobs. So here's a book that I highly recommend, the best book I've seen on the future of work, called Humans Are Underrated, which is exactly on this question as what's left for humans when AI and robots are doing everything. But what does he say about the kind of person, kind of people we have to be in this world? He says the meaning of great performance has changed. It used to be that you had to be good at being a machine, at being predictable, at following rules, maybe very sophisticated rules, but still something machine-like that AI can take over. Even something as complicated as a doctor's diagnosis, that can be done by AI. And in a way, that's machine-like. In the future, great performance will require us to be intensely human beings. Things that an AI cannot do as well as humans can. So again, this should inform our view of education. And a big part of being human, of these human skills, is asking questions. There's a lot of arguments about what AI will be able and not be able to do. But I think one of the most powerful things that humans will keep doing will be asking the questions that computers have to solve. And this is one, a lot of people wonder why there are so many Jewish scientists, and I get this question, and this is a particular Nobel Prize winner who says, "My mother made me a scientist without intending it." Other mothers would ask, "So, did you learn anything today?" My mother would ask, "Izzy, did you ask a good question today?" That difference, asking good questions, made me a scientist. Asking questions is a human skill. And here's a beautiful idea from Pablo Picasso. He said this before computers even existed, really, that computers are useless, they only give you answers. It's a very powerful notion, that the power of questions. But it's not just questioning. There are many human skills that we're not getting today that we need desperately. Think about, let's say you're hiring an engineer. You can find the engineer who has the right 5 years of experience and went to the right school. You can find a lot of those engineers. But can you find an engineer who can communicate, who has emotional intelligence, who can work in a team, who can lead a team, who has determination, who has empathy, emotional intelligence? These are things that we don't learn in school, and this is why the companies are having so much trouble filling the jobs with the students, because the students aren't getting these skills. Some people call them soft skills, 21st century skills, life skills. I think maybe the right word is human skills. And we have to figure out how can the education system give us these skills, and why is it not doing so today? So today, I would say that education is focused on knowledge. Now, if you ask people what education is, it's about knowledge. What else could it be? And these life skills, or these human skills, are just kind of hovering around the outside. They're not something that we give tests for, that we have curriculum for. We're somehow supposed to pick it up from the atmosphere or be born with them. It's not something that the education system is considering part of its job to deliver. So I think that to prepare us for the future, we actually have to flip this. Not just a flipped classroom, but a flipped education. We need to focus on human skills. And it's not a choice between human skills and knowledge. Actually, the process of gaining these human skills, we will get more knowledge, not less. We will remember, I mean, think about what we learned in high school and how much we remember or don't remember and how much we use or we don't use. We will get the kind of knowledge that sticks, that matters, if we do what we need to get these kind of human skills. So it's very hard to think about how to do this. I think we need to begin, and I think we should start with the idea of challenges. Now, people talk about problem-based learning. I mean, that's a good idea, but I'm sorry, project-based learning. I'd rather call it challenge-based learning, because a challenge is different than a project. A challenge is real. It's not just a game, it's not made up. And if we make school more about challenges, we can get both the knowledge and the human skills, because in order to face a challenge, you need to work together, you need to think strategically, you need to be adaptable. There's no rule book. And as you do those challenges, you will have to learn a lot, to teach yourself a lot. You will learn a lot from that experience. So, but I also want to share a particular Israeli or Jewish education technique, which is kind of on the forefront of education, even though it's, we've been doing it for 2,000 years. We talk about peer-to-peer learning. And we actually have a peer-to-peer learning model that Jews have been doing for 2,000 years, which is called Hevruta. You have two people who are sitting over a text. Typically, it's the commentary on the commentary of our holy book. And what do they do when they're sitting there? This is a rabbi from the 3rd century. He says, whenever I would say something, my partner would pose 24 problems, and I would give him 24 solutions. And as a result, our discussion of the subject became clear. So it's this process of questioning, of arguing, and it's a process that can be done one-on-one, much better than in a classroom. I think peer-to-peer learning is a huge part of the answer here. And then there's another crazy thing that Israelis do that is not part of the education system. And that is, we have this sort of leadership track that starts with youth movements. Starts with youth movements where kids, start when they're age about 10, and they continue till they graduate from high school. And this picture is from a thing that happens every summer where about 1,000 kids from all over the country get together and they build stuff for 10 days. And what's amazing about this thing is there's no adults. It's basically run by the kids. And this is the nature of youth movements. Our education secretary education minister in Israel, we hosted a bunch of ministers in Jerusalem, and he spoke to the ministers, and he said he actually didn't talk much about education. He talked about when he was 16, and he was in one of these youth movements. And he and another kid took out 60 10-year-olds out for a hike in the wilderness without any adults. Now, this is a crazy amount of responsibility, and this is typical of kids teaching kids. And I think that this can work in education as well. And this combination of challenges and responsibility has a tremendous impact. And in Israel, this leadership track that begins with the youth movements continues. This here, they build all these kind of structures, and then they take them apart a few days later. This kind of youth movement process continues all the way to the strangest thing that Israelis do in terms of making us more challenged is the military service. Now, I'm not advocating military service for anyone. We don't even want to do it in Israel. And our military is completely different than any other, as far as I can tell, because we give these young people tremendous amounts of responsibility, tremendous challenges. What happens is they go through basic training, they go through training in whatever they're doing, like intelligence or tanks, and then the minute they're finished training, they start getting missions thrown at them. And these are problems, these are challenges that they don't know how to solve, that they weren't trained to solve. Why? Because there's no point in challenging someone with something they know how to do. So they keep giving them things that look impossible. And you have this experience of dealing with impossible things again and again. And you come out and you say, hey, I did all those impossible things. Maybe I can do something else impossible, and that's a startup. A startup is just a mission. And to do the startup, you break it down into little, smaller missions. So this is a huge part of the explanation of why we're Startup Nation. And again, all of this is outside the education system. It's on this kind of parallel leadership track. So kind of ironically, I think Israel has discovered the essence of how we need to reinvent education, and we don't even know it. Because we need to take this formula that is outside the school and bring it into the school. This formula of challenging, of being confronted with open-ended situations. I'll give you an example that we used in the book of two kinds of methods of preparing yourself for life. There's a Harvard case study that compares Northwest Airlines with the Apollo space program. Now, Northwest Airlines produced a huge rule book that everyone had to understand and maybe even memorize that would prepare them for any situation that would come up in Northwest Airlines. And Apollo took a different approach. They trained their astronauts in a very diverse way, putting them through all kinds of difficult situations. And basically, one form of training was to give people rules that try to define the situation under any circumstances. In the space program, they basically realized that we have no idea what's going to happen up there. We can't give you a rule book. We have to prepare you for any situation. So what happened was, when there was a crisis in Northwest Airlines, everything fell apart because there was no book. The book didn't cover that. But the astronauts could take on any difficulty that they encountered. And that's basically the way the Israeli military works, is that you're taught to, not specific rules, but how to deal with any situation. And that's exactly what our education system needs to do, because when we get out of the situation, out of the education world, we are confronted with the real world, which is not defined, which we have to be ready for, not by learning specific rules. So how can we think more? Again, it's very hard to imagine how to create this new kind of challenge-based education, responsibility-based education. But I think if we start asking ourselves the right questions, maybe we can get there. And I think if there are hints at some techniques that could help us. One is that if we let kids teach kids, we're doing a lot towards the kind of skills that we want. Now imagine that obviously we want our kids to learn how to read, but why not have an older kid teach them how to read? When you teach them something, you learn it. We all know that. We also know that one-on-one is the most effective way of teaching. And teachers, there's just not enough teachers to always go one-on-one. But if we have kids, older kids, teaching younger kids, then both of them gain. And not only that, one of our biggest challenges in education is we leave so many people behind. Only a small fraction of the students are academically talented and manage to be successful in the system. What about the rest who feel like they're failures? But what if every student could be a teacher of something? Every student could have that pride, could have that responsibility, could have that experience. So we need to leverage the power of peer-to-peer learning, peer-to-peer teaching. And some schools in Israel are doing this, and it's working very well. I wish the whole system were this way. But one school principal there says, you know, I used to have 30 teachers, now I feel like I have 400 because everyone's a teacher and everyone's a student. Responsibility. Just, again, trying to do this thought experiment in your mind. Think about your first 18 years and think about the times that had the most impact on you. When I think about that, I think of times when I was given some kind of responsibility that was beyond my age. I was 15 years old, and I was given responsibility in a touring company with much older people. It doesn't matter. Everybody has their own story about this experience that had a deep impact on them. And they tend to be experiences when you're given some responsibility. And we don't do this in school, but we can if we put our mind to it, if we think, how can we do that? Same with challenges. We got to think about how can we create them, how can we let kids figure out their own, give themselves their own challenges. Another very important concept is that it doesn't matter how long you've been in a class. This idea that you've passed a class just because you spent a year studying it, you know, but you got a low grade, you didn't really understand it, you're not going to remember it. That should disappear. We need to go to a paradigm of mastery, which is a lot like it works in video games. You don't spend a certain amount of time on one level and then automatically go to the next level. You need to master each level yourself, and it doesn't matter if you master it in an hour or a month. You got to hit mastery, and then you move on to the next level at your own speed. We need mastery-based thinking. And if we care about human skills, we need to measure them. Right now, basically every business person knows you get what you measure. So our tests, we don't have any tests for human skills, but those tests can exist. They don't have to be written tests. They can be, there are many imaginative ways of assessing personal growth. And that's another thing, is that as kids progress through the system, they should, every year or every few months, be setting goals for their own personal growth. That they do that with someone their age, someone, an adult, and you keep comparing how you did in the last period and what you want to improve in the next period. And those kind of goals are personal growth goals. It's not just about, you know, how much math you learned or whatever. If we ask ourselves these questions, I think we can get there. We can now. I was asked to talk about the catalyst for change. We have here many great companies, great education companies that are doing tremendous work. And this industry will continue, but I think there's a missing industry. Because right now we have this trajectory, the education system leads to the big test gets you in the university, and you go out into life. That's the process. And that worked for a while. But now the process is broken. We're just not getting to the life part correctly. There's this gap, and the gap needs to be filled. And the gap really actually is an opportunity to create a whole new industry. Those human skills have to come from somewhere. They're probably going to come first from outside the education system. Because whenever there's a market failure, something that's not happening naturally, private sector comes in and fills that gap. There's a tremendous need. So just like there's a tremendous industry now to pass the Gaokao, there can be a new industry that needs to be built to provide those human skills while we're waiting for the education system to do so. So I think this is a tremendous opportunity for the education industry, for the EdTech world. And the first companies to either embrace this dire need of society and to build that industry, or the new companies that come along that try to fill that gap, they will be considered the most innovative companies in the education world. And the countries that manage to do this will gain a tremendous amount of human capital. They will be considered among the most innovative countries in the world. And as much as technology helps us do so many things, AI cannot change our mindset. It can't bring us to the realization that human skills are important. It can't tell us how to give those skills. And I'm not sure, actually, I think it's difficult for AI actually to be a big part of helping us gain those skills. So we need to a little bit put aside the thinking, the excitement around technology, and think about what's stopping us. And I think that what we're really missing now, we have so much technology. What we're missing now is the imagination to see where we need to go and the leadership to get there. Thank you very much.
感谢 Saul Singer 先生的精彩演讲。Thank you, Mr. Saul Singer, for your most intuitive speech.